The massive alien ships appeared without warning above Earth's blue skies. They blocked out the sun with their dark metal hulls that stretched for miles across space. Captain Jake Morrison was drinking his morning coffee on the Mars Defense Station when the alarm started screaming. "Sir, we have unknown contacts entering the system," Sergeant Amy Collins said, her voice shaking. "They're huge, bigger than anything we've ever seen." Jake put down his coffee and looked at the screen. His heart stopped. The alien fleet was enormous. Hundreds of ships, each one the size of a small city. They moved in perfect formation, like a deadly dance across the stars. "Get me a direct line to Earth Command," Jake ordered. Now, on Earth, President Lisa Hamilton was in a meeting when her aide burst through the door. The young man's face was white with fear. "Madam President, you need to see this immediately," he said. Lisa followed him to the Situation Room where General Pete Rodriguez and Admiral Claire Davis were already waiting. The wall screens showed the alien fleet hanging in space like dark storm clouds. "How many ships?" Lisa asked. "We count over 300 vessels," Admiral Davis replied. "And these are just the ones we can see. There might be more hiding behind the moon." "What do they want?" Lisa asked. Before anyone could answer, every screen in the room went black. Then a voice spoke. It was cold and mechanical, but it spoke perfect English. "People of Earth," the voice said. "We are the Zeltharian Empire. We have come to offer you a choice." The screen flickered and showed a creature that looked like a cross between a lizard and a spider. Its 6 eyes glowed red, and sharp teeth filled its mouth. This was High Commander Vextar. "Your species is young and weak," Vextar continued, "but you show promise as workers. We offer you life under our rule. You will serve the Empire. You will build what we need. You will mine the metals we require. In return, we will not destroy your world." Jake Morrison watched the broadcast from his station around Mars. His hands clenched into fists. Around him, his crew stood in shocked silence. "You have 72 hours to decide," the alien commander said. "Surrender your weapons, disband your armies, prepare to serve. If you refuse, we will turn your planet to glass and ash. We have done this 47 times before. We do not make empty threats." The screen went black again. The room was quiet except for the hum of machines. Dr. Alex Carter rushed into the Situation Room carrying a tablet full of data. He was the head of Earth's alien research team, though until today they had never found any aliens to research. "I've been analyzing their broadcasts," he said, breathing hard. "These Zeltharians control at least 12 star systems. They have technology that's hundreds of years ahead of ours. Energy shields faster than light travel, weapons that can crack planets in half." "What about their weaknesses?" General Rodriguez asked. "That's the problem," Alex said. "I can't find any. Their ships are too advanced, their weapons are too powerful. If they wanted to destroy us right now, they could do it in minutes." President Hamilton stared at the dark screens. She thought about her children, about all the children on Earth. She thought about every human being who had ever lived and dreamed of reaching the stars. "What about negotiation?" she asked. "Maybe we can work out some kind of deal." Admiral Davis shook her head. "Madam President, they're not here to negotiate. They're here to conquer. This isn't a discussion. It's a demand." Over the next few hours, the alien ships demonstrated their power. They fired precise beams of energy that destroyed several old satellites. The beams cut through metal and electronics like a hot knife through butter. The message was clear. Resistance was hopeless. Jake Morrison called a meeting with his officers on the Mars station. They gathered in the small conference room, their faces grim. "What are our options?" he asked. Lieutenant Ben Hayes, a young pilot from Texas, spoke first. "We could fight. Go down swinging." "With what?" Sergeant Collins asked. "Our missiles bounce off their shields. Our lasers can't even scratch their hulls." "So we just give up?" Hayes demanded. "Let them turn us into slaves?" "Maybe slavery is better than death," another officer suggested quietly. The room fell silent. Jake looked at each of his people. They were good soldiers, brave men and women who had signed up to defend humanity. But they had never faced anything like this. "I need to think," Jake said finally. Dismissed. That night, Jake stood alone in the observation deck looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, 47 other species had faced this same choice. 47 civilizations had decided that life as slaves was better than death as free beings. But as Jake watched the alien ships moving slowly through space like giant metal predators, he realized something important. The Zeltharians had never met humans before. They didn't understand what they were dealing with. Back on Earth, President Hamilton couldn't sleep. She walked through the empty halls of the White House, thinking about the impossible choice. In just 60 hours, she would have to decide the fate of every human being who had ever lived. She stopped at a window and looked up at the night sky. The alien ships were visible even from Earth, tiny dots of light that shouldn't be there. She thought about the American Revolution, about people who had chosen to fight against impossible odds rather than accept tyranny. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Dr. Carter. "I found something interesting in their transmissions. Request. Immediate meeting." 20 minutes later, the core team was back in the Situation Room. Alex Carter looked excited and terrified at the same time. "I've been studying their language patterns and historical records they transmitted," he said. "In over 1,000 years of conquest, the Zeltharian Empire has never encountered a species that chose mutual destruction over surrender." "What do you mean?" Lisa asked. "I mean, they've never fought anyone crazy enough to burn everything down rather than give up," Alex explained. "Every species they've conquered made the logical choice. They valued survival over freedom." General Rodriguez leaned forward. "Are you suggesting we're different?" "I'm suggesting," Alex said slowly, "that they have no idea what humans are capable of when our backs are against the wall." As the 72-hour deadline approached, humanity prepared to give the Zeltharian Empire an answer they would never forget. The 72 hours were almost up. President Lisa Hamilton stood before the cameras in the Oval Office knowing that her next words would echo across the galaxy for centuries to come. "People of Earth," she began, her voice steady and strong, "we have heard the Zeltharian Empire's demands. They want us to kneel. They want us to become slaves. They promise us life if we surrender everything that makes us human." She paused and looked directly into the camera. "Our answer is no." High Commander Vexitar received the transmission aboard his flagship. He had expected this response initially, but assumed the humans would change their minds once they saw his fleet's power. Most species needed a small demonstration before they accepted reality. "Prepare to begin the pacification," he ordered his bridge crew. "Standard procedure. Destroy their military installations first, then their government centers. Leave the population centers intact. We will need workers." But as the Zeltharian ships moved into attack position, something unexpected happened. Captain Jake Morrison, watching from his Mars station, activated a signal that had been prepared in secret during the past 3 days. "All units," Jake said, into his communicator. "Execute Scorched Earth Protocol. Repeat, execute Scorched Earth Protocol immediately." Across the solar system, human military commanders received the same order. It was not an order to fight the aliens. It was an order to destroy everything of value before the aliens could take it. On the moon, Colonel Ben Hayes stood in the main control room of the lunar mining facility. This base produced rare metals that took decades to extract and refine. It was worth billions of dollars and employed thousands of people. "Sir, are you sure about this?" asked his second-in-command, Major Lisa Wong. Ben looked at the detonation controls in his hands. "The aliens want our resources. They want to use our work to build more ships and conquer more worlds. If we can't have it, nobody can." He pressed the button. The nuclear charges that had been secretly planted throughout the mining complex exploded in sequence. The entire facility collapsed into the moon's surface, creating a crater half a mile wide. Decades of human work vanished in seconds. On Mars, engineer Katie Johnson was doing the same thing to the terraforming stations. These machines had been working for 50 years to make Mars suitable for human life. They represented humanity's greatest engineering achievement. "This is insane," her assistant Joe Miller said as they set the final explosives. "It'll take 100 years to rebuild this." "We won't be around to rebuild it," Katie replied grimly. "But maybe someday someone else will, and they'll do it as free beings, not as slaves." The terraforming stations exploded one by one, their fusion reactors creating miniature suns that burned across the Martian sky. The atmosphere processors collapsed, the weather control systems failed, and the agricultural domes shattered like glass bubbles. High Commander Vextar watched in confusion as human installations destroyed themselves before his fleet could even attack them. "What are they doing?" he demanded. "Unknown, sir," his tactical officer replied. "They appear to be destroying their own infrastructure." "That makes no sense," Vextar said. "Those facilities are valuable. Why would they destroy what we could use?" He didn't understand that this was exactly the point. Back on Earth, Dr. Alex Carter was implementing the most dangerous part of the plan. Hidden throughout the solar system were automated nuclear devices that would activate if the human command structure was destroyed. They called them dead man switches. "If they kill us all," Alex explained to his team as they made final preparations, "these devices will detonate automatically. They'll spread radioactive material throughout the asteroid belt, around Jupiter's moons, and in Earth's upper atmosphere. The entire solar system will be poisoned for generations." His assistant, Dr. Mary Foster, looked pale. "You're talking about making our own star system uninhabitable. Better uninhabitable than useful to an empire that enslaves entire species," Alex replied. "They can conquer dead worlds if they want. They won't profit from it." The Zeltharian fleet finally began its attack. Their energy beams struck Earth's military bases and government buildings. But instead of the expected surrender, each facility exploded from within moments before the alien weapons hit them. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his Mars station as alien ships surrounded him. His crew had already evacuated in escape pods, but Jake remained to make sure the station's reactor would overload properly. "Human vessel," came a transmission from the alien fleet. "Surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded." Jake smiled grimly and opened a channel to broadcast his response across the solar system. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Human Defense Force. We don't surrender. We don't kneel. And we don't let tyrants profit from our deaths." He pressed the final button. The Mars Defense Station's fusion reactor went critical, creating an explosion that vaporized 3 Zeltharian cruisers that had moved too close. Jake's last act was to show the aliens that humans would rather die fighting than live as slaves. Admiral Claire Davis commanded the last major military installation, a defense platform orbiting Earth's moon. As Zeltharian dreadnoughts moved to surround her, she received reports from across the system. "Admiral, the lunar bases are gone," her communications officer reported. "Mars terraforming is destroyed. The asteroid mining platforms have been scuttled. Even the research stations around Jupiter have self-destructed." Claire nodded. It was working exactly as planned. The aliens would find nothing but wreckage and radiation when they finished their conquest. "What about the civilian populations?" she asked. "Most major cities have been evacuated to underground shelters," came the reply. "The nuclear bunkers will protect them from the initial bombardment, but—" The officer's voice trailed off. "They all knew the shelters wouldn't last forever." "Admiral," her weapons officer called out, "Zeltharian dreadnoughts are charging their main guns. They're preparing to destroy the platform." Claire looked out at the alien ships. They were beautiful in a terrifying way, sleek and deadly like metal sharks swimming through space. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had threatened humanity's freedom. "All hands abandon ship," she announced over the intercom. "This is Admiral Claire Davis. It has been my honor to serve with you all." As her crew evacuated, Claire remained alone on the bridge. She had one final gift for the Zeltharian Empire. The defense platform's reactor was connected to a massive antimatter storage facility. When it exploded, it would create a blast visible from Earth's surface. The Zeltharian commander of the nearest dreadnought opened a communication channel. "Human vessel, you are surrounded. Surrender now, and your death will be quick." Claire laughed. "Commander, you still don't understand what you're dealing with. Humans don't surrender. We make you pay a price you'll never forget." She initiated the antimatter cascade. The explosion tore through space like a newborn star, vaporizing the defense platform and taking 5 Zeltharian capital ships with it. The shockwave damaged dozens of other alien vessels. High Commander Vextar stared at the expanding ball of fire where the human defense platform had been. In 30 minutes of combat, he had lost more ships than in his last 5 conquests combined. And the humans hadn't even tried to win. They had simply made victory as expensive as possible. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we're receiving automated transmissions from throughout the system. The humans have activated some kind of insurance policy." The message was simple but chilling. "Solar system quarantine in effect. Radiation hazard. This system will remain contaminated for approximately 200 years. Welcome to your prize." Vextar realized with growing horror that the humans had turned their entire star system into a poisoned wasteland. They could conquer it, but they couldn't use it. Every resource was destroyed, every facility was wrecked, and the radiation would make the system dangerous for centuries. For the first time in his long military career, Vextar understood that victory could taste like defeat. The humans had given the Zeltharian Empire exactly what they deserved: a system full of ash and ghosts, worthless to anyone and impossible to profit from. It was a prize that cost more than it would ever be worth. 3 weeks after the battle, the Sol system looked like a graveyard. Earth's cities lay in ruins, their buildings reduced to twisted metal and broken concrete. Mars was a dead world again, its atmosphere poisoned, and its terraforming machines nothing but scrap metal scattered across red dust. The asteroid belt glowed with radiation that would kill anyone who came too close. High Commander Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the reports from his survey teams. The numbers were impossible to believe. In 3 weeks of occupation, they had found nothing useful. No working factories, no intact mining equipment, no technology worth salvaging. The humans had destroyed everything. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, "the radiation levels throughout the system are still rising. Our engineers estimate it will take at least 200 years before we can safely establish permanent bases here." Vextar's 6 eyes narrowed. "What about the human survivors?" "We estimate less than 50,000 remain alive in underground shelters on Earth," the officer replied. "The shelters are heavily shielded and difficult to locate. Most will run out of supplies within 6 months. And they still refuse to surrender?" "Yes, sir. When we do locate shelter entrances, the humans either seal them permanently or—" The officer paused uncomfortably. "Or they detonate explosive charges, killing themselves rather than be captured." Vextar had conquered 18 star systems in his career. He had seen species fight bravely before accepting defeat. He had seen civilizations negotiate for better terms. He had seen desperate last stands and noble sacrifices. But he had never seen anything like this. Deep beneath the ruins of Denver, Captain Sue Miller commanded the last operational human military unit. Her army consisted of 37 soldiers, 12 civilians, and 1 damaged radio that could still transmit to other star systems. It wasn't much, but it was enough for what she needed to do. "Are you sure the signal is getting through?" she asked Sergeant Bob Parker, their communications specialist. "Yes, ma'am," Bob replied. "The emergency beacon is broadcasting on all frequencies. If there's anyone out there listening, they'll hear us." Sue nodded and activated the transmitter. She had no idea if any other intelligent species were listening, but she had to try. Humanity's sacrifice would mean nothing if no one learned from it. "This is Captain Sue Miller of the Human Defense Force," she began, her voice echoing through the underground bunker. "I am transmitting from the ruins of Earth, 3 weeks after our world was conquered by the Zeltharian Empire." She paused, thinking about the words that might be humanity's last message to the galaxy. "We want the universe to know what happened here," she continued. "The Zeltharians came to our system and offered us a choice: become slaves or die. We chose to die as free beings rather than live in chains." In the darkness of the bunker, her small audience listened in silence. They were the last free humans in the solar system, and they all knew they wouldn't survive much longer. "But before we died, we made sure our deaths cost them everything," Sue said, her voice growing stronger. We destroyed our cities rather than let them use our buildings. We poisoned our worlds rather than let them exploit our resources. We turned our entire star system into a wasteland that will cost them more to maintain than they can ever hope to gain from it. Thousands of light years away on the Zeltharian homeworld, the High Council was meeting an emergency session. The reports from the Sol system had reached the capital, and the news was disturbing. Council Elder Mordak, the oldest member of the ruling council, spoke first. Commander Vextar's reports are unusual. In over 1,000 years of expansion, we have never encountered a species that chose mutual destruction over integration. The humans were clearly mentally unstable, suggested Council Member Zarthul. No rational species would destroy itself rather than accept our generous offer of continued existence. Perhaps, Elder Mordak replied slowly. But the cost analysis is troubling. We lost 43 ships in the conquest. We gained no usable resources, no functional technology, and no productive worlds. The Sol system will cost us more to garrison than we can extract from it for the next 2 centuries. The council chamber fell silent. For the first time in their imperial history, a conquest had resulted in a net loss. Back in the Denver bunker, Dr. Alex Carter was documenting everything. As the head of humanity's xenobiology department, he had become their historian by default. His notes would be transmitted along with Captain Miller's final broadcasts. The Zeltharians made a fundamental error in their calculations, he wrote, by candlelight, his tablet having died days ago. They assumed that all intelligent species value survival above all else. They never considered that some beings might value freedom more than life itself. Alex looked around the bunker at the faces of the last free humans. There was Janet Kim, a teacher who had been visiting Denver when the attack began. There was Paul Rodriguez, an engineer who had helped wire the explosives that brought down the city's power grid. There was Emma Davis, a nurse who had been treating injured civilians when the bombs fell. They were ordinary people who had made an extraordinary choice. They had chosen to stand with their species even when standing meant dying. The most important thing to understand, Alex continued writing, is that we didn't do this out of hatred or revenge. We did it because some things are worth more than survival. Freedom is worth more than life. Dignity is worth more than safety. And the right to say no is worth more than the promise of continued existence. Captain Miller's transmission continued for 3 hours. She told the story of humanity's last stand, describing how Captain Jake Morrison had chosen to die fighting rather than surrender. She spoke of Admiral Claire Davis, who had turned her final defeat into a victory by taking enemy ships with her. She told of the thousands of humans who had chosen to destroy their own life's work, rather than let it serve an empire built on slavery. We know that other species have faced this same choice, Miller said near the end of her broadcast. 47 worlds have knelt to the Zeltharian Empire. 47 civilizations have chosen survival over freedom. We don't judge them for that choice, but we want them to know that there was another option. Her voice grew quieter, more personal. We want them to know that somewhere in the galaxy, there was once a species that said no. We want them to remember that resistance is possible, even when it seems hopeless. We want them to know that the price of freedom doesn't have to be paid by the oppressed alone. Sometimes you can make the oppressor pay it too. High Commander Vextar received a copy of the human transmission. He listened to it in his private quarters, trying to understand what had driven these creatures to such extremes. In his experience, conquered species eventually adapted to imperial rule. They found ways to be useful, to carve out small spaces of comfort within the larger system of control. But these humans had refused to adapt. They had refused to find comfort in slavery. They had chosen to burn everything rather than let the empire profit from their subjugation. For the first time in his career, Vextar began to wonder if there were other species in the galaxy who might make the same choice. The thought kept him awake at night, staring out at the stars and wondering which ones might choose ash over chains. In the Denver bunker, the last humans were running out of food and clean water, but they were still free, and they used their remaining time to make sure their story reached every corner of the galaxy. Captain Sue Miller made her final transmission as the shelter's power systems began to fail. "This is humanity's last message to the stars," she said. "We're gone now, but we're not forgotten. Remember us. Remember that we chose to stand. And remember that you have the same choice." The transmission ended. The Sol system fell silent. But across the galaxy, other species had heard humanity's final words, and some of them began to wonder if they had made the right choice when their own time came to kneel or stand. The Zeltharian Empire had won the Sol system, but they had also learned that victory could be more expensive than defeat, and that some prizes cost more than they were worth. 6 months had passed since the last human transmission went silent. The story of Earth's destruction had spread through the galaxy like wildfire, carried by traders, smugglers, and the secret networks that connected enslaved worlds across the Zeltharian Empire. On the industrial planet Kepler 442b, a Threnody worker named Veltar listened to the human recording for the 100th time. His people had been slaves for 300 years, mining rare crystals deep beneath the planet's surface. They had forgotten what freedom felt like, but the human voices speaking from beyond death reminded them. They chose to burn everything, rather than let their masters profit, Veltar whispered to his work crew as they huddled in the darkness of the mine shaft. A whole species chose death over slavery. His friend Kixtal, an older Threnody with scars from years of hard labor, shook his head. "It's madness. They had families, children. How could they choose death for everyone?" "Maybe," said another worker named Dorgan. "They understood that slavery isn't living. Maybe they knew their children would be better off dead than born into chains." The conversation was dangerous. If the Zeltharian overseers heard them talking about the humans, they would be punished. But the story was too powerful to ignore. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were happening in mines, factories, and slave camps on dozens of worlds. High Commander Vextar was dealing with problems he had never faced before. His monthly reports to the High Council grew longer and more troubled with each passing week. "The human incident has created what our psychologists call a contagion effect," he dictated to his aide. "Enslaved populations throughout the Empire are discussing the Sol system conquest. Some are asking questions about their own situations." The aide, a young Zeltharian officer named Texavin, looked up from his tablet. "Sir, surely a few conversations can't threaten Imperial stability." Vextar's expression darkened. 3 days ago, a group of Mantari workers on Proxima Centauri B seized control of Orbital Station 7. Instead of negotiating for better conditions, they destroyed the station's manufacturing equipment and then blew up the reactor core. They killed themselves and took the station with them. Texvin's eyes widened. The Mantari had been model slaves for over 2 centuries. They were known for their compliance and work ethic. "That's not all," Vextar continued. "On Wolf 359, the Vorthan crystal miners have started something they call human strikes. Instead of working faster when punished, they work slower. When threatened with death, they destroy their tools. They're making themselves unprofitable. On purpose." Unknown to Vextar, his problems were about to get much worse. In a hidden asteroid base at the edge of the Empire, someone had survived humanity's last stand. Captain Jake Morrison floated in the medical bay of a small cargo ship, his body covered in bandages and burn scars. He should have died when the Mars Defense Station exploded, but a lucky debris field had thrown his escape pod clear of the blast. A group of smugglers had found him days later, more dead than alive. The smugglers were Karathi, a species that had refused to join the Empire and lived as pirates and traders in the space between stars. Their captain, a scarred veteran named Jexalam, stood beside Jake's medical bed. "Human," Jexalam said in broken English. "Your people's story has reached every corner of the galaxy. Some call you heroes, others call you fools." Jake tried to sit up, wincing at the pain. "What do you call us?" Jexalam's alien face twisted into what might have been a smile. "I call you teachers. You showed the galaxy something it had forgotten, that the price of oppression can be made too high to pay." "The Empire still stands," Jake said bitterly. "My people are dead, and nothing has changed, has it not?" Jexlum activated a holographic display showing news reports from across the Empire. Look and see what your sacrifice has purchased. The reports painted a picture of growing chaos. On Titan Prime, the native Kalari had abandoned their factories and retreated to the planet's polar regions, sabotaging the infrastructure as they fled. On Centauri Station, dock workers had begun systematically damaging ships during repairs, making them unsafe to fly. The humans taught them something dangerous, Jexlum explained. They taught them that slaves can choose not to be profitable. Jake watched the reports in amazement. His people's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. The idea was spreading, growing, becoming something larger than any single species. On the Zeltharian homeworld, the High Council was in emergency session. Elder Mordak paced before the assembly, his usually calm demeanor cracking under stress. The situation has moved beyond isolated incidents, he announced. We now have coordinated resistance activities on over 40 worlds. The economic impact is becoming severe. Council member Zarthul stood to speak. Perhaps we have been too lenient. A few public executions might remind these slaves of their place. We tried that on Kepler 442b, another council member replied. The Threnody workers responded by collapsing their own mine shafts. They buried themselves alive rather than continue working for us. We lost 300 years of excavation, work in a single day. Elder Mordak stopped pacing. The human strategy is spreading. They're teaching other species that economic warfare can be more effective than military resistance. Meanwhile, Jake Morrison was learning the same lesson from a different perspective. The Karathi smugglers had introduced him to representatives from dozens of species, all connected by hidden communication networks that spanned the galaxy. The Empire controls space, explained Nixtar, a representative of the crystalline Vorthon species. But they cannot control our willingness to work. The humans showed us that refusal is a weapon. A Threnody representative named Veltar, the same mining supervisor who had first heard the human broadcasts, joined the conversation via encrypted transmission. My people have studied your tactics. We're implementing what we call the human protocol. Destroy everything of value before the enemy can use it. Jake felt a strange mixture of pride and horror. His species had become a symbol, but the symbol was spreading destruction across the galaxy. You have to understand, he told the assembled representatives. This path leads to enormous suffering. Entire populations will die. Entire populations are already dying, replied another voice, this one from a Kalari factory worker. The only difference is that now we choose how and when. Veltar's transmission crackled with static as he spoke. The humans gave us something more valuable than life. They gave us back our dignity. They showed us that we don't have to accept whatever scraps our masters throw us. High Commander Vextar found himself fighting a war unlike any in Imperial history. His enemies weren't trying to defeat him in battle. They were trying to make victory meaningless by destroying everything worth conquering. His latest report, to the High Council, was the bleakest yet. Resource extraction across the Empire has dropped by 60%. Manufacturing output is down by 40%. Entire sectors are becoming economically unviable to maintain. The numbers told a story of slow-motion collapse. The Empire's strength had always been its ability to turn conquered worlds into productive assets. But if the conquered populations refused to produce, the entire system began to crumble. Sir, his aide Texvin asked quietly, do you think the Empire can survive this? Vextar stared out at the stars, thinking about a small blue planet where an entire species had chosen death over surrender. I don't know, he admitted. The humans may have been primitive, but they understood something we didn't. They understood that an empire built on slavery is only as strong as the slave's willingness to serve. Across the galaxy, that willingness was disappearing. Species that had served the Empire for centuries were remembering what it meant to say no. The word spread from world to world, carried by whispered conversations and secret transmissions. The humans were gone, but their message lived on. Some things are worth more than survival, and freedom is one of them. The Zeltharian Empire had conquered the Sol system, but in doing so, they had planted the seeds of their own destruction. The galaxy was learning to choose ash over chains, and that choice was spreading faster than any Imperial fleet could travel. 2 years after humanity's extinction, the Zeltharian Empire was dying. What had started as whispered conversations in mineshafts and factory floors had grown into a galaxy-spanning revolution that threatened to tear apart 1,000 years of Imperial rule. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the rebel flagship Last Hope, looking out at the largest fleet ever assembled by enslaved species. Ships from dozens of worlds hung in space around him, a collection of converted cargo vessels, mining barges, and stolen military craft. They were heading toward the Zeltharian homeworld for what everyone knew would be the final battle. "Sir," called out Veltar from the communication station. The Threnody had become Jake's second in command after proving himself as a brilliant tactical mind. "We're receiving final confirmations from all sectors. The coordinated strikes are ready to begin." Jake nodded grimly. Across the galaxy, rebel forces were preparing to implement the ultimate version of humanity's strategy. If they couldn't win the war, they would make sure the Empire gained nothing from their victory. On the industrial world of Titan Prime, engineer Katie Johnson's replacement, a Kalari technician named Morlux, stood before the planet's main fusion reactor. The facility powered half the Empire's military production, but not for much longer. "Remember," Morlux said to his team, "we wait for the signal. When the humans' fleet engages the Imperial forces, we destroy everything. The Empire can have our world, but they'll inherit ashes." Similar scenes were playing out on 200 worlds across the galaxy. The rebellion had learned from humanity's example and improved upon it. They weren't just destroying their own infrastructure anymore. They were targeting the Empire's core systems, the planets and stations that kept the Imperial machine running. High Commander Vexitar paced his flagship's bridge as reports poured in from across the Empire. His once mighty fleet was spread thin, trying to maintain control over dozens of rebelling worlds. Many of his ships had been sabotaged by their own maintenance crews. Others had simply disappeared, their crews defecting to the rebellion. "Sir," his aide Texavan reported, his voice shaking. "Long-range sensors detect a massive rebel fleet approaching the homeworld. They're broadcasting on all frequencies." "Put it through," Vexitar ordered. Jake Morrison's voice filled the bridge, calm and determined. "This is Captain Jake Morrison, last survivor of Earth, speaking for the Free Stars Alliance. We come not as conquerors, but as liberators. The age of the Zeltharian Empire ends today." Vexitar felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. Not fear of death, but fear of what these rebels represented. They had turned his own strategy against him, using the Empire's vast size and complexity as a weapon. "People of the galaxy," Jake continued his broadcast, "today we strike not just for freedom but for the right of every thinking being to choose their own path. The Empire offered you slavery or death. We offer you a third choice. Liberty? No matter what the cost." On Kepler 442b, Veltar's mining crew had taken control of the planet's main orbital station. Instead of using it as a base, they had packed it with explosives. When the Imperial fleet arrived to retake the system, they would find nothing but debris. "The humans were right," Veltar said to his workers as they prepared the final detonation sequence. "Some things are worth more than survival. Our children will inherit a free galaxy even if we don't live to see it." The battle for the Zeltharian homeworld began with a surprise that shocked both sides. As the rebel fleet approached the planet, half of the Imperial Defense Forces switched sides. Crews that had served the Empire for decades suddenly turned, their weapons on their former comrades. "What are you doing?" Vexitar demanded as he watched his own fleet tear itself apart. The answer came from Captain Zixtal, commander of the Imperial cruiser, Eternal Victory. "We're choosing freedom, sir, just like the humans taught us." Jake Morrison watched the chaos with a mixture of joy and sorrow. The rebellion was working, but the cost was enormous. Entire fleets were destroying each other in the void between stars. Planets were burning themselves to ash rather than serve the Empire. Billions were dying to ensure that billions more could live free. "Sir," Veltar called from his station, "we're receiving reports from across the galaxy. The simultaneous strikes have begun." The reports painted a picture of coordinated destruction on an unprecedented scale. On every major imperial world, enslaved, populations were rising up not to overthrow their masters but to destroy everything of value before the empire could use it. The Vorthon crystal miners had collapsed their tunnels, burying centuries of excavation work under miles of rock. The Mantari shipbuilders had sabotaged their orbital yards, sending half-completed dreadnoughts tumbling into their host stars. The Kalari factory workers had overloaded their fusion reactors, turning their industrial complexes into radioactive wastelands. Elder Mordak stood in the High Council chamber on the Zeltharian homeworld, watching his empire crumble on the strategic displays. 1,000 years of conquest and expansion were unraveling in a matter of hours. How did it come to this? He asked the empty chamber. Most of the other council members had already fled or were trying to negotiate separate surrenders with the rebels. The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Alex Carter's final research, transmitted from Earth's ruins 2 years ago, had been preserved by the rebels. His analysis played on the chamber's speakers like a ghost from humanity's grave. The Empire made a fundamental error, Carter's recorded voice explained. They assumed that all intelligent species would value survival above all else. They never considered that some beings might value freedom more than life itself. They built their empire on the foundation of fear. But fear only works when the threatened population wants to live at any cost. Elder Mordak sank into his chair as he understood. The humans hadn't just chosen to die rather than serve. They had taught the entire galaxy that death was preferable to slavery. And once that lesson was learned, the Empire's power became meaningless. The final battle raged around the Zeltharian homeworld, as Jake Morrison led the rebel fleet against the remaining Imperial forces. But the real victory was already won. Across the galaxy, the Empire's infrastructure was burning, destroyed by the very people who had built it. Captain, Veltar reported, we're receiving surrender requests from 17 Imperial sectors. They're offering to negotiate terms. Jake shook his head. No negotiations, no terms. The Empire dies today, completely and permanently. That's what my people died for, and that's what we're going to deliver. As the last Imperial ships fell silent around the Zeltharian homeworld, Jake Morrison made one final broadcast to the galaxy. His words were carried by every functioning communication system, reaching every corner of known space. People of the galaxy, he began, the Zeltharian Empire is no more. They said kneel, and we replied by burning their empire to ash. But we didn't fight this war to become new masters. We fought it to ensure that no one would ever be a master again. He paused, thinking about his dead homeworld and all the humans who had sacrificed everything to make this moment possible. From this day forward, every world chooses its own path. Every species governs itself. Every being has the right to say no to those who would rule them. This is humanity's gift to the galaxy, the knowledge that freedom is worth any price and that tyrants can always be made to pay more than they can afford. The galaxy had learned humanity's final lesson. The Empire said kneel, but the universe replied by choosing to stand, no matter what it cost. In the end, ash and freedom were worth more than gold and chains. Somewhere in the void where Earth once orbited, the radiation was finally beginning to fade. But humanity's legacy would burn bright in the hearts of free beings for millennia to come. They had taught the galaxy that some things truly are worth dying for, and that the price of liberty must always be paid by those who would take it away.